Do you have a paranormal encounter you'd like to share with us? Send us an email with your story for a chance of it being featured on Weird World. Dive into a collection of 5 more true and fascinating timeslip accounts, each offering a glimpse into the past within the present. Experience Michael's mysterious encounter with the revival of an old school, Sarah's disorientating drive through Christchurch, Debbie and her uncle's encounter with the Victorian era Preston, Callum's discovery of a remote Scottish festival, and Stephanie's brief journey to an earlier era on a Hillside Road. These narratives blend history and reality, challenging our understanding of time while inviting us to contemplate its mysteries. Autumnal Apparitions. On a damp and foggy evening in the fall of 2005, Michael Thompson, a recent resident of a small Pennsylvania town, set out for his usual evening jog. His route often took him past an old abandoned elementary school. The building, a 2-story structure from the 1920s, had been closed since the 1980s and was a familiar yet eerie landmark in the neighbourhood. Its grey brick facade, boarded up windows and lack of lighting made it an intimidating sight, even more so after sunset. Michael, having recently moved to the area, had become accustomed to passing the desolate structure. That particular evening, as darkness enveloped the town, thick clouds obscured the moon and a light drizzle began to set in. As he turned the corner into the block where the school stood, Michael was surprised to see it bathed in light. It appears as though every window on the ground floor was illuminated, casting a warm glow on the surrounding fog. He recalled seeing school children's crafted fall decorations adorning the walls through the windows. Figures moved inside the building, including a man in his 40s, wearing a brown sweater and thick-rimmed glasses, standing in one of the rooms. The sight was oddly comforting in the otherwise gloomy night, and seemed to resemble some sort of evening open house or parent-teacher conference. Absorbed in his run, though, he thought little of it at the time. It wasn't until he ran a block further that the reality of what he had seen struck him. The school had been abandoned for decades. He stopped abruptly, his heart racing, and turned back. To his astonishment, the block behind him was pitch black. The school had returned to its unlit state. Confused and unnerved, Michael ran back to the school, only to confirm that it was indeed dark, deserted, and still boarded up, just as it has always been. The encounter deeply troubled him, leading him to discuss it with his doctor out of concern that he might have hallucinated the entire episode. His doctor suggested it might have been a product of an overactive imagination or a daydream during his run. But for Michael, the experience felt too vivid and real to dismiss so easily. In the years that followed, Michael would jog past the old school countless times, always with the lingering hope of witnessing the mysterious lights again, but it never occurred. The school was eventually demolished, but every fall, especially on dark, drizzly nights, Michael found his thoughts drifting back to that inexplicable evening, the vivid memory of the illuminated school out of time. A U-turn, back in time. In October of 2023, Sarah Jenkins, a lifelong resident of Christchurch, New Zealand, experienced an event that challenged her understanding of reality. That evening, as dust settled over the city, Sarah was driving home with her teenage daughter Emma after picking her up from a friend's house. The journey took them through one of the city's red zones, areas left as vast open spaces following the destructive 2011 earthquakes and subsequent demolitions. As they approached the major road roundabout, Sarah noticed that the streetlights were out, casting the area into deeper darkness. Thinking little of it, she continued on her familiar route. However, it soon became apparent that the surroundings were abnormally dark and nothing seemed familiar. Concerned, Sarah made a U-turn, returning to the roundabout to take an alternative route. Down this road, the landscape was unsettlingly altered. The trees lining the road were larger and closer than she remembered. Confused, Sarah made another U-turn, deciding to cross the usual concrete bridge, a familiar four-lane expressway. To her astonishment, the bridge had transformed into a narrower, two-lane structure with wooden railings and older-style unlit lamps. The modern expressway was gone. Continuing past the bridge, the environment felt increasingly foreign. The trees were wrong, and the expected swamp was nowhere to be seen. Sarah made another U-turn back to the roundabout, but now lacked its usual directional and suburb signs. The only remaining sign displayed an unfamiliar suburb name, without mentioning the city centre. Circling the roundabout slowly, Sarah confirmed the absence of familiar signage. She mentioned to Emma, still engrossed in her phone, that she was lost, receiving only a typical teenage response. Deciding to trust her instincts, Sarah chose a direction and drove into the enveloping darkness, her headlights seeming feeble in the thick mist. Gradually, the environment began to lighten, and familiar landmarks reappeared. The streetlights were back on, and they were just 5 minutes from home. Sarah was left bewildered by the experience, regretting not exploring further past the altered bridge. The next day she returned to find everything as it always had been: the concrete 4-lane expressway, the normal roundabout with its usual signs, and no trace of the wooden bridge. Emma, having barely noticed the events, insisted that they had only circled the roundabout once. The experience left Sarah with a profound sense of wonder and disbelief, leading her to discover the timeslip phenomenon and to explore it further. A peek into Preston's past. About 3 decades ago, in the early 90s, Debbie Schwartz and her uncle Peter encountered a bewildering incident after attending a classical music concert in Preston in Lancashire, England. The city, deeply familiar to them for their monthly musical outings, had an unexpected mystery that evening. The concert venue's car park, nestled beneath the hall, was accessible only through a single road, a central artery in the busy heart of the city, with a lively atmosphere of shops and bars housed in Victorian buildings. After the concert, Debbie and her uncle got into the car and exited the car park, embarking down the familiar stretch of road. However, they quickly realised something was off. The usual evening hum of the city was replaced by an eerie silence. The road, usually a hive of activity, was deserted. The street lights, which should have been electric, now appeared as old-fashioned gas lamps. Instead of the familiar shops and bars, rows of houses lined the street, which was devoid of any road markings or street signs. The pair stopped in the middle of the road, their car engines idling as they took in their surreal scene. They exchanged looks, confirming with each other that they were indeed witnessing the same inexplicable transformation. Deciding to investigate further, they continued down the road at a cautious pace, intending to circle the block and return to the bizarre street. As they exited the street, reality snapped back into place. The familiar sights and sounds of Preston city centre returned. Intrigued and unsettled, they drove back around the block and approached the top of the mysterious street. As they descended it once again, everything was as it should be. The shops, bars, cars, and people were all back to their modern appearance. This extraordinary incident left an enduring mark on Debbie and Peter. The vivid memory of the Victorian street, so starkly different from the modern cityscape they knew so well, remained etched in their minds like a still from a film. They were certain of their route. There was no other streets they could have mistakenly taken. The singular, iconic road transformed for a brief moment into a portal to the past, offering them a glimpse into an era long gone, an experience that continued to fascinate and mystify Debbie and her uncle for years to come. The Forgotten Festival of Fintry. In the spring of 2014, Callum Reid, an amateur Scottish landscape photographer, set out to capture the serene beauty of the Fintry Hills. Known for their untouched landscapes, the hills were a perfect subject for his project on Scotland's natural heritage. While trekking through a particularly remote area, Callum stumbled upon a clearing he'd never encountered before. To his astonishment, the clearing was bustling with activity. It appeared to be a festival, but unlike any he'd seen in modern times. The people were dressed in early 19th century Scottish attire, and traditional folk music filled the air. Intrigued, Callum began to photograph this unexpected scene. He watched as people danced around a maypole, children played with wooden toys, and vendors sold handmade crafts. The air was thick with the aroma of fresh bannocks and stew. Engrossed in this vibrant setting, Callum barely noticed the sky darkening. As the first drops of rain fell, the scene before him began to blur and shift. In moments, the clearing was empty, the festival gone, as if it had never been there. Returning home, Callum reviewed his photographs, only to find them showing just the empty clearing. The festival of Fintry remained a vivid yet unrecorded memory, a fleeting glimpse into the past that once celebrated the seasons in those very hills. Homage on Hillside Road. When Stephanie Bates was around 11 years old, she experienced a moment that defied explanation, a fleeting journey through time on a seemingly ordinary road. As she walked alone, the street around her was as familiar as any other day. Then in the blink of an eye, the scene transformed dramatically. Suddenly, Stephanie found herself on the same road, but no longer alone. It was bustling with people, all dressed in attire from the late 18 or early 1900s. They were walking up the hill towards her, immersed in laughter and conversation. Despite the crowd, not a single person seemed to notice Stephanie. They passed by her, their smiles and chatter creating a lively atmosphere, yet she remained an invisible observer to this lively scene from another era. As Stephanie turned the corner, reality shifted once more. The crowd vanished, and she was back in the 2000s. The street returned to its modern state, the houses reappeared, and the layout reverted to what she knew. The entire episode, though brief, was intensely vivid. Initially, Stephanie considered it might have been a daydream, but the experience felt far too real. The smells were distinct, and the transformation of the street was complete and detailed. This wasn't a figment of her imagination. The sights, sounds and scents were too concrete, too visceral. Although the incident lasted less than 5 minutes, it left a lasting impression on Stephanie. The memory of this mysterious slip through time remained with her as vivid in details as the day it happened. This inexplicable experience became a part of her, a personal glimpse into a world and time beyond her own.